Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. More on them a little bit later. Welcome back to Mecha March Madness and to Sonic Speed Reading, where we are finally covering the Scrapnik Island mini-series. I talked about this in a different video when the first issue dropped, and I said we wouldn't be covering it until the entire series was out, and it finally is, and since we do this particular marathon every year, I can't think of a better time to talk about it in full. This is the first full Sonic story written by Daniel Barnes, and it also includes the art of Jack Lawrence, colors by Natalie Fordrain, letters by Sean Lee, with editors Riley Farmer and David Marriott. Of course, there are other artists that I have mentioned before that have included some interesting Badnik designs as well. But yeah, I will share my thoughts on the overall story once we're done covering it. But I'm going to tell you right now, this is one of my favorite Sonic stories ever. Alright, we kick things off with Sonic and Tails flying through a treacherous storm. Apparently it is so bad, Tails says they need to land somewhere, otherwise it's going to rip the tornado apart. And conveniently, at that moment, Sonic notices an island, but to their shock, on this island they see the Death Egg. And they do take the time to mention that this is the old one, confirming that there have been other Death Eggs in this canon. Now that could be the Sonic 4 Episode 2 one, that could be the Forces one, that could be both. Whatever the case is, I do appreciate that effort. And at least in this canon, this does confirm that Eggman created a whole new Death Egg when we saw it again. And the original one has been sitting here this whole time. Our two heroes are not sure why it's here at all, but Tails is considering landing on it, which is good because he's not left with a choice as lightning strikes the tornado, sending them hurtling towards the island. We then cut to Sonic waking up, his head aching and surrounded by what looks to be a bunch of broken badniks in a dark, creepy room. He gets up to find his lost sidekick, but as he lands on the floor, he hurts his foot, and at the same time realizing he has a metal contraption attached to it, very much looking like a saw trap there. But before he has time to really consider what the heck is going on, he hears a beep from the Miles Electric, the little handheld that Tails keeps on him at all times. Something that Sonic says himself. Tails never leaves that just lying around. With the Miles Electric in hand, he begins to call out for his friend, and as we can see behind him, some of those badniks are still active. He begins to make his way down the seemingly abandoned hallways of the Death Egg, thinking to himself that this used to be Eggman's most powerful weapon, and now it's just a total dump. Putting pieces together, realizing that he must have blacked out during the crash. But as he walks by a familiar contraption, we see a red eye come to life, and that's actually what its name is. This is the Red Eye. This was the mini-boss at the end of Act 1 of the Death Egg Zone in Sonic and Knuckles. Not only is that a great callback, and very fitting considering this is the original Death Egg, it's also one of the most stress-inducing bosses from the classic games. Very fitting considering the horror theme of Scrapnik Island. And not only that, it does have a use. As we see from its perspective, it's a security camera, and a mysterious figure watches Sonic's progression through the egg. Sonic peers into one of the many rooms down the hallway and notices a faint glow coming from a sunflower, one suspended in one of the many capsules you find in the games. Getting some Beauty and the Beast vibes from this scene here. Sonic does think it's weird, but once again his attention is grabbed by something down the way, a loud screech. And as he exits the room, we see a light come to life. Oh, I wonder who that could be. Sonic's journey takes him to a giant hangar, wherein lies the egg carrier, the very same one from Sonic Adventure. The nostalgia is already running deep, and Sonic himself says that this place is like a museum to all of Eggman's past failures. But he once again hears the screech, and he uses the Miles Electric to shine a light on the source. And to Sonic's relief, he sees a busted coconut badnik, just one of those little monkey robots you'd find in the first zone of Sonic 2. Even fully intact, these things were never a big threat to Sonic, and you can see that in the relief in his reveal. But as the badnik crawls out, it's clear something is not right, because the bottom half is not that of a coconut, it's that of a caterpillar. And Sonic looks around to see that he is surrounded by all kinds of robotic abominations. Now, to be fair, badniks are never a big deal to Sonic, but they are a problem in great numbers, and even then, this has taken a psychological toll on the hedgehog. This is a very disturbing scene. So much so that he thinks that he might still be dreaming. And as he backs away from the robots, he bumps into something even more intimidating. Sonic looks up to see the towering, terrifying figure of Mecha Sonic, the very same one we fought at the end of Sonic and Knuckles. As creepy as the situation is, Sonic jumps straight into action, revving up preparing for an attack, but unfortunately his foot is still hurt. He can still move, but it is very limited. He does not have the power to take all of these bots on at once. So he does the next best thing and spin dashes out of the group and into the next room, every step hurting his already busted ankle. Mecha Sonic and the robots take chase after him, running into what was clearly a factory floor for many badniks. And Sonic has taken cover in one of the many capsules that you would find at the end of the many acts of the classic games, the ones that would hold those little animals. As Mecha walks by, not noticing the hedgehog, Sonic does breathe a sigh of relief, but isn't proud that he is so hindered that he has to hide from robots. He thinks to himself he's glad Knuckles can't see this right now, but before he can even finish the thought, Mecha has found his hiding spot and proceeds to pop open the capsule. I love this face Sonic makes as he cradles a piece of metal. But hey, as we've seen many times before, he is quite resourceful with the slab as he slaps it to the floor and uses it to city escape out of the room. Sonic turns his face to mock the chasing Mecha Sonic and unfortunately does not pay attention to what's in front of him as he runs headfirst into another robot, an E-series no less. But behind him is his friend Tails, who quickly informs the hedgehog that all of these robots are actually friendly. He goes on to explain that these are the Scrapniks, and they actually help carry Sonic into the Death Egg after they crash and built what turns out to be a foot brace for him. The E-series then introduces itself. This is E117 Sigma. It apologizes for accidentally frightening the hedgehog. That was never their intention. Then together as a group, they head towards the surface as the storm should be over at this point. With this newfound understanding, the tone of the book begins to change. As they walk down the hallway, we shift from a dark, cold color scheme and move to a warmer one. And as our characters walk, Sigma further explains that the storm was actually their fault as well. It was caused by the station's malfunctioning climate disruptor. Sigma has tried to repair it, he's tried to just take it offline completely, but so far, no luck on either end. But regardless of that, the robots are keen to help Sonic and Tails repair the tornado, and in the meantime, they are welcome to their home, which is revealed to be Scrapnik Island. I adore the juxtaposition here. This is a far warmer place than you would have expected from the very first panels of the book, or even the covers itself. Everything leading up to the reveal of Scrapnik Island made it feel like this was going to be a dark and sinister place. What Sonic and Tails have instead found was a thriving society, one that Tails completely geeks out over. An entire civilization made out of recycled machines and spare parts, as he puts it. Sigma seems to be pleased at Tails' enthusiasm and asks to show him around. Sonic watches after them, but still gives a leering look to Mecha Sonic. Considering all the trouble that particular robot gave Sonic back in the day, you can't entirely blame him. Sonic begins to follow Tails and Sigma, still keeping an eye on Mecha, who is now left alone at the top of this hill, looking on peacefully, or so it would seem, as sparks begin to shoot out of the robot and his visor turns red. But Mecha shakes it off and looks down at his trembling hand, forcing it into a fist, showing he is trying to maintain control of something going on inside him. But as Mecha Sonic watches our heroes walk down towards the center of the island, even further behind, he is watched by none other than a rebuilt Mecha Knuckles, who, yes, is decked out in the hat from the anime, as well as the fighting gloves and shovel claws from Sonic Adventure. And that is where part 1 ends. Now, before we get on to our next issue, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. If you're trying to build an online business or you want to set up a nice little space to show off your creative skills with a portfolio, or even if you wanted to just put together a creative gift, there are so many ways to take advantage of a web page. And Squarespace makes it as easy as possible. They have a huge variety of templates, fonts, color palettes, everything you need to show off your unique style without it being overwhelming. And it doesn't just stop at looks. You can take advantage of their behind-the-scenes analytics to see where your customers or viewers are coming from. They can pull all your social media accounts into one hub and help send out any messages or advertisements or whatever you have from one convenient spot and give you any notification from from any of those websites there as well. Everything you need to build a proper marketing strategy to help you grow as a creator or as a business or really whatever you want. It's never been this easy to mark your place in the digital frontier. Go take a look for yourself. I've only mentioned a handful of features they offer. You can get a free trial going over at squarespace.com, and if you want to take the plunge, head over to squarespace.com/gameapologist and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Part 2 picks up in a flashback, showing us a damaged Sigma covered in seaweed washed up to the shore of Scrapnik Island. As it regains consciousness, it looks up to see the damaged remains of the Death Egg. As time progresses, we see that Sigma himself has actually been repairing a lot of damaged badniks, bringing them back for a second chance at life. The latest being an egg robo, which would make sense since they originated from the Death Egg. But I did want to quickly point out that Sigma's new right arm is an egg robo arm, and this particular egg robo is missing its right arm. I'm just saying maybe that he could have swapped them out. I don't know. Not super important, but I did take note of that. Time progresses even further as we see Sigma attempting to build some kind of shelter as his attention is grabbed by one of the many Scrapniks, bringing him towards the beach where they find the shattered remains of Mecha Sonic. We then transition to the present on the very same beach in the very same spot where the real Sonic is waking up from a nap. A little Scrapnik lands on his foot, and when Sonic says what's up, he's surprised to hear it respond with a hello. As it turns out, Tails has just finished a translator module. It decrypts the Scrapnik's communication signals and converts them to rudimentary speech. It can't do too much. They can only speak through the speaker of the Miles Electric, but it is still something, and clearly a very big deal for the little Scrapniks, excited to greet their fleshy friends. As all of this is happening, Sigma, Mecha Sonic, and a group of egg robos show up to the scene, greeting the heroes and surprised to see that the robots are greeting them back. Sigma, impressed with Tails' work, asks how he managed to do it, and Tails explains that newer badniks tend to have a built-in failsafe to prevent outsiders from hijacking their signals. But older models, like all the bots here on Scrapnik Island, don't have that failsafe built in, allowing the Fox to convert the signals into audio on his datapad. But as intrigued as Sigma seems to be, over his shoulder we see Mecha Sonic eyeing the Miles Electric. Clearly, this has his attention too, as we see him glitch out one more time, unnoticed by everyone around him. Sonic then asks what's the deal with their plane, and Sigma gives them both good and bad news. The good news is that most of the damage is superficial, so it can be very easily repaired. The problem is that one very specific piece, the drive generator, is cracked, and it needs to be fully replaced. And I love that the egg robos are displaying that on one of the old school monitors. Thankfully, they are on a giant junkyard of an island. They will have to take a trip deep into the Death Egg, which may take some time. Sonic is excited to go on yet another adventure, but Tails reminds him that his foot has been through a lot of punishment lately. This is obviously referring to the incidents in the mainline IDW series, as well as, well, what's happening to his foot right now. But Sonic dismisses his concern, and besides, he's not exactly one to stay still. He's going to go crazy if he has to keep laying around. And Sigma reassures Tails, saying that Sonic will be just fine in the company of both Sigma and Mecha. While they're doing that, Sigma recommends that Tails stays behind and gets to work on the plane itself, and he will be helped by Sigma's 3 egg robo assistants. The two groups set off to their tasks as they are looked on by Mecha Knuckles. And before they head on to the main task itself, Sigma says that Mecha would like to make a quick detour, which Sonic agrees to. Now you might be thinking that the robots are about to show their hand and they're setting the Hedgehog up for a sinister trap, but no, as we soon find out, the detour was to that room with the sunflower. As Sigma explains, it inexplicably washed ashore a long time ago, and Mecha has been caring for it ever since, hoping to plant it in real soil one day. The Scrapniks wish to one day leave the island. It may be their home, but it also is something of a prison, a constant reminder of their shameful origins. They want to be more than just discarded robots of Eggman. They want to live their own lives and move on from his shadow if they're ever going to be truly perfectly happy. Sonic, hearing all this and seeing Mecha take so much care over a living thing, sees another side of the big silent robot and nudges him in the arm, saying that, "Aw, you're just actually a big ol' softy." This once again causes a spark from Mecha, who leers down at the real hedgehog and silently moves out of the room. The three then move on back to the hangar holding the egg carrier, which Sigma calls the scrambled egg carrier. Sigma explains to Sonic that they hope to rebuild this and that in turn will be their means to escape the island. Sonic says he's getting a bit nostalgic looking at this thing, and it does give him a new perspective as it was quite eerie earlier the first time he saw it. But as they make their way towards the carrier, they're followed close behind by Mecha Knuckles. Sigma explains that the integrative drive generator should be somewhere around their particular area, and like any good horror story, recommends that they split up to cover more ground, handing off a flashlight to Sonic for his non-robotic eyes. And I think one of the artists pointed this out on Twitter, but I love this little detail where the eyes of Mecha Sonic and Sigma both light up when they're in darker environments like this. Just love those little details. As Sonic and Mecha Sonic scrounge around in the dark in silence, Sonic looks over to the robot and decides to bury the hatchet. He apologizes for the mix-up earlier, saying that he knows that they have a history, but a lot has changed. Sonic sees that Mecha is moving forward and actually alludes to Metal Sonic, saying that there's a certain other Sonic robot that could clearly learn a thing or two from Mecha. So he wants to start fresh, and Mecha trepidatiously in turn reaches his hand out to shake Sonic's. But the tender moment is interrupted by an attack from Mecha Knuckles, as Mecha Sonic quickly moves the real deal out of the way from the attack. Sonic prepares for a fight, but Mecha quickly grabs onto him and begins to make an escape. Meanwhile, Sigma has found the missing piece for the plane, but has little time to celebrate as Sonic and the two mechas crash into the room. Sigma holds Sonic aside while Mecha protects the both of them. Sigma explains that Mecha Knuckles' original directives compelled him to defend the Master Emerald Shrine on Angel Island, but the directives were so deeply embedded into his programming that Sigma was unable to completely remove them. So instead, he diverted the directives to guarding the egg carrier instead. So apparently, Mecha Knuckles just sees Sonic as an intruder, just like the real Knuckles would. And Sigma tells the robot to stand down. Sonic is their friend. And the Mecha Echidna gives pause, but only for a moment, as he continues on his attack, striking Sigma, knocking him to the ground, which infuriates Mecha Sonic. And we are very quickly shown who is more powerful out of the two mechas, as the Sonic double moves out of the way of an attack, grabs Mecha Knuckles by the face, slams him to the ground, and sends him crashing into the side of a wall. The robot Echidna retaliates, getting a couple of good heavy strikes in on the robot hedgehog. And as Mecha Sonic crashes to the ground, we see some scrambled memories of his time on Sky Sanctuary, fighting against Knuckles himself. But the corrupted memory splits between Sonic and Knuckles, and it begins to speak, saying that Mecha Sonic might look scary, but he's actually trash. The visions distort into a digital mess as Mecha tries to strike his foe, but unfortunately, where there was once a fist, there is none, leaving nothing but damage remains behind. And the once complete robot from the past is now replaced with the rusted remains that he is today. And his enemy takes on the twisted form of Sonic, Knuckles, and the silhouette of Eggman, with the shadow of Eggman saying that Mecha Sonic was his greatest creation to date, but then forms into Knuckles, clearly remembering the final moments of their original fight, with the word trash repeating in the robot's head over and over again, awakening something dark in the metal hedgehog. He wakes back up to see Mecha Knuckles once again on the attack against Sonic himself, but this time Mecha Sonic grabs the back of the Echidna's head and pins him down with a violent spin dash, tearing the robot apart and finishing the fight. Sonic says that might have been a little overkill, but thanks him for the save all the same. But as Mecha Sonic turns his attention to the real hedgehog, Sonic can see something has changed, and Mecha Sonic lunges at the real hedgehog, pinning him to the wall. And that is where part 2 ends. As we pick up with part 3, we see Sonic strapped to a table with a goofy helmet on his head, with Mecha Sonic busying away at a keyboard and monitor. And I love this little callback to a lot of what Sonic has been doing in IDW, as he says he's getting sick and tired of giving my enemies the benefit of the doubt only for my trust to be betrayed thing. He yells out to the robot, saying that he had a second chance at life with a whole island island of friends, Sonic thought he had changed, so what gives? Of course, Mecha Sonic can't respond. He doesn't have the means to, and is not giving Sonic any kind of attention at the moment, as the monitor is solely focused on the progress on the tornado, and more specifically, the discarded Miles Electric, which clearly is what Mecha Sonic is trying to get. Sonic then asks what's the deal with the dumb thing on his head. Does Mecha plan to suck out his brains or something? Only to have Mecha just turn silently looking at the hedgehog. Sonic was just joking, but now he's not entirely sure. But this whole scene is seen by one of the many little Scrapniks as it goes running off to find some kind of help. The book then switches over to yet another flashback, and this one is now from the perspective of Mecha Sonic, as we see him come back online for the first time, and his first vision being that of Sigma, welcoming the robot to Scrapnik Island. As Mecha picks himself up, he takes a look at his new limb, and from there we see him progress, discovering his new life and purpose on Scrapnik Island, with Sigma saying that Mecha is no longer a tool for destruction and conquest. On this island, he will discover a new purpose. Here he is safe, here he is free, here he is home. All the while we see memories of Mecha helping out Sigma with his repairs, discovering the sunflower that washed ashore, and joyfully playing with the many little Scrapniks. But we cut back to present as we see Sigma regain consciousness, discovering the horrific scene of the badly battered Mecha Knuckles, cradling the robot like one of his many children, asking what Mecha had done. We turn our attention back to Tails the Egg Robos and the little snitch of a Scrapnik as it's plugged into the Miles Electric, showing the scene he had come across with Sonic and Mecha Sonic. Silently, Tails moves over to a pile of scrap and quickly builds himself an arsenal, saying, "Let's go save Sonic." And yes, my eagle-eyed friends, that is indeed a Sega Menacer that Tails has put together. I don't know if that little headpiece is supposed to be anything specific. I just think it looks like a Saiyan Scouter, but maybe it's like a VR piece. I don't know. Point is, Tails is very much at home on this island. This is his jam, and now he is going to step up to save his friend. Soon, Tails and the three Robos make their way through the scrapped Death Egg. And for the first time in my life, I'm really wanting a squad-based first-person Sonic shooter, because this looks awesome. As we have Tails commanding the three robots, using a radar and telling the bots to stay frosty. Carefully, silently, they make their way down the hallways, and around the corner they hear a loud clank as it moves closer and closer to their location. Tails jumps around the corner only to see that it's Sigma cradling the damaged Mecha Knuckles. Quickly, the two groups catch each other up. Tails explains that Mecha is holding Sonic captive, and Sigma says that this was something he was worried about. As it turns out, Mecha's systems are very, as he puts it, robust, and Sigma's knowledge of the software is somewhat limited. When Sigma first rebuilt Mecha, he attempted to rewire Dr. Eggman's original programming to the best of his ability, but it seems he wasn't sufficient. He theorizes that Mecha's old protocols and subroutines must have reawakened, and they are warping his cerebral processor. And despite everything that Mecha has done so far, Sigma still lays the blame on himself. He should have done better by the damaged robot hedgehog. He's not thinking clearly. But as Sigma finishes his explanation, there's a crackle on the Miles Electric. The radar begins to blip madly as a voice slowly crackles out of it, saying, "On the contrary, Sigma, my mind has never been clearer." And as they all stare at the screen, Mecha simply says, "Behind you." And the entire group turns around, opening fire. But Scrapnik or not, this is still a robot copy of Sonic the Hedgehog, and Mecha easily dodges every single one of their attacks. And his voice once again appears on the Miles Electric, saying, "You don't know what it's like to be discarded, forgotten." And with a loud egad from Sigma, we see that he has disappeared. Mecha is quickly taking each of them out one by one. Tails, realizing he is far too fast for them, issues a retreat for the two remaining Robos. Tails says that he has underestimated Mecha's speed. He had assumed that the mismatched parts and the rust would have slowed him down, but it turns out this robot is still just about as fast as the real Sonic. But as he finishes his explanation, he turns around to see that the two remaining Egg Robos are gone, and all that's left in their place is Mecha Sonic, alone with the little fox. He tells Tails that he was once Dr. Eggman's most remarkable creation, that they were supposed to conquer the world together, and after Mecha was rebuilt, he waited for Eggman. He was so certain Eggman would come and find him, and they would try again, but instead, he was abandoned. Mecha was left to rust on this forsaken junk pile, a grave error on Eggman's part, and Mecha says now that error shall be corrected. And Tails rightfully asks, what does any of that have to do with with Sonic and Tails. Mecha says he has plans for his fleshy counterpart, none of which are any concern to the fox, and as long as Tails hands over the tablet, Mecha will spare him. But even with a bit of fear in his voice, Tails still tells the robot to come and take it. The fox opens fire, but Mecha once again easily dodges every single shot, closing the distance between the two and knocking the gun out of Tails' hand. But Tails is still Tails, and he is not yet unarmed as he rolls into his own spin dash. He knocks himself into the robot, but Mecha manages to grab a hold of him and slams him into the ground, taking the tablet for himself. He then picks up the fox and shoves him down a trash chute, saying that Tails will now see what it feels like to be thrown away. Having finished up with the fox, he returns back to Sonic. But now, Mecha has a voice, and when Sonic demands to know where Tails is, Mecha says he's where he belongs. Don't worry, because Sonic will be joining him shortly. As we see exactly what Mecha is up to on the monitor behind him, he plans to switch the minds of himself and the real Sonic. And that is where part 3 ends. We pick up with part 4 with many of the little Scrapniks watching Mecha prepare his plans, which he explains to Sonic. Apparently the helmet on Sonic's head is an old Eggman prototype. There was once a time when the Doctor became enamored with the idea of controlling his badniks directly using only his mind, and he just about cracked it, but then he got bored and scrapped the entire project, which lines up with a lot of what we've seen Eggman do in the series prior. That's literally the entire point of Scrapnik Island. But ironically, where Sigma was trying to rebuild everyone to give them a new life, Mecha is taking another one of Eggman's old designs to finish its sinister purpose, or at least giving it a new purpose, as he just intends to put his mind into Sonic's body, explaining that the egg carrier is just a piece of junk. It's held together by blind faith. It will never fly. But Sonic, according to Mecha, can run across the water. And that is apparently how Mecha plans to escape the island once and for all. But Sonic then asks, what about Sigma? What about the rest of Mecha's friends? Does he just plan on ditching them the same way Eggman ditched him? Mecha takes a pause, but then says friendship is a weakness. It was a brief glitch in his software brought on by an eroding processor. They were never his friends, which is all heard by the broken-hearted badniks above. Sonic says he doesn't mean any of that, but Mecha is tired of talking as he begins the process of the mind swap. The two hedgehogs crackle with electricity as we see their minds link. But before the process can finish, the Scrapniks come to the rescue, crawling all over Mecha Sonic and destroying the machine. As the smoke clears, Mecha gets back up, saying that all of his work is gone. Now he will never leave the island. The Scrapniks have ruined everything, and he says the line, "I'll crush you." And if you guys don't know anything about Super Mario Bros. Z, do not worry, we are going to be talking about that very soon. All we need to worry about right now is a furious, pissed off, scary ass robot Sonic as it begins to chase down the helpless little Scrapniks. But we turn our attention over to a couple of other little Scrapniks as they unbind Sonic from the table. He seems to be just fine, but now there's a new voice in his head, leaving him very confused. The voice says, plans ruined, must escape island. I'm not trash. The mind transfer was a failure, but some of it still got into Sonic, and now he's connected, for lack of a better term, telepathically with Mecha Sonic, and he can feel the anger and sadness of the robot. He turns his attention over to Mecha, who is violently attacking the helpless little Scrapniks, which infuriates the real deal. As Mecha stands over a cowering little Scrapnik, the very first one Sonic came across, Sonic spin dashes into the robot hedgehog. And like any classic robot Sonic versus real Sonic fight, they go crashing into each other and racing down the hallway. Sonic thinks to himself that his ankle feels like it's being stabbed by 1,000 needles, but he has to keep it together, one foot in front of the other, fight through the pain. But his own thoughts are interrupted by Mecha's, as he responds, "Pain? What do you know about pain?" It's then and there that Sonic and Mecha realize they can read each other's thoughts and can communicate directly through their minds. Mecha can feel what Sonic is feeling, but says that it's nothing compared to what he has endured. Sonic has never been cast aside and robbed of his value, his purpose. And Mecha says that while Sonic may have bested him the last time they thought, this time Sonic is all alone and he is out of options. He has reached his limit. But Sonic just smirks, saying that that's the thing about limits, because despite his busted ankle, he does rev up into a super peel out, blasting past Mecha, saying that limits are meant to be broken, as the two hedgehogs rush towards a giant Eggman-faced furnace. Within it, the two have an insane main battle of speed, rushing around the melting core. But as quick as the fight began, it's just as quickly over, as Sonic lands one final kick into the robot's face, destroying his brace. And as the robot falls, he comes back to his senses, remembering his cherished moments with his Scrapnik friends. As Mecha lies defeated, falling towards the melting core of the furnace, Sonic reaches out his hand, but Mecha smacks it away, saying that Sonic's freedom is enviable, to explore the world at his leisure, unhindered by regret or failure. But Mecha feels he deserves this. He asks Sonic to leave him. His original directive, which was to destroy Sonic, has been a failure, and his new directive, protect the Scrapniks, have also been a failure. Mecha sees himself as a failure. He sees himself as worthless. He sees himself as trash. But Sonic just tells him to cut the crap, and once again reaches out his hand, telling Mecha to give himself value and purpose, because nobody else will. And with those words, Mecha once again reaches out and finally grabs a hold of Sonic's hand. But in this glorious moment, Sonic realizes he might have overdid it with his foot. He can't move at all. And I love the immediate shift in tone as Mecha begins to freak out, saying that after all that big talk, he can't actually get us out. But as they're sassing each other, Sonic's other hand is grabbed by none other than Tails. And behind him, a whole slew of Scrapniks, with Sigma and Mecha Knuckles included. And together, as a team, they pull the two hedgehogs out. And while you would think they'd be furious with Mecha Sonic for all the damage he's caused, they instead embrace him, and Sigma asks for his forgiveness. He was unaware of Mecha's inner turmoil. Mecha Knuckles, as you'd expect, stands aside from the celebrations, as do Sonic and Tails, smiling on at the beautiful scene in front of them, with, to Tails' surprise, tears welling up in Sonic's eyes. Surprised, somewhat shocked even, Tails almost asks if Sonic is crying, but Sonic says, nah, these aren't his tears. A little later on, we see Mecha Sonic once again getting up from a table, with Tails saying that both him and Mecha Knuckles are now officially free of Eggman's old program, with Sigma saying that they will never forget the kindness and bravery of the two fleshy friends they made. We once again see Mecha Knuckles standing aside from the rest of the group as they go off to fix the tornado. And once again, we see the perspective of Mecha Sonic looking down at his hands, clamping them together with a new purpose. As the sun begins to set, the two hedgehogs look over the damaged Death Egg, with Mecha saying, the value of one's existence isn't determined by success and failures. Both are fleeting and impermanent. What truly matters is having the courage to keep moving forward. He sees that, and he thanks Sonic for helping him get that perspective. Mecha doesn't know what the future holds for him, for any of them, and the uncertainty is disquieting, but life is disquieting, and with the help of his friends, he'll face it head on. And as the two hedgehogs make their way back to the group of the Scrapniks and Tails, with Mecha looking up at the departing heroes, carefully embracing that sunflower he's been tending to all this time, saying he is done being controlled by yesterday, and he's going to live for tomorrow. And that is where the story ends. Now, I gotta tell you, this is one of my all-time favorite Sonic stories, bar none. And I know a big part of that is largely due to nostalgia. I am a big sucker for Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and a huge fan of Mecha Sonic in general. I didn't know if we would ever see this robot come back in any real form. I have been obsessed with seeing a good, clear visual identity for this thing. This is one of the very few robots that has never gotten any kind of official art, fully showing off the little details we usually miss when it comes to sprite work. And if this is anything like the Sonic 2 Mecha Sonic figure, it's very likely that the art team here really only had the sprites to work off of. So yeah, I still don't have the original official artwork to go off of, which is a shame. I don't even know if that exists in any kind of fashion. But then again, if you look at the official artwork of the badniks of Sonic and Knuckles, they really don't differentiate a whole lot from what you see on screen. I'm rambling a bit here, that's not the entire point of the story, but I love Mecha Sonic so much, and I love seeing him in any kind of official capacity, because this is now what he looks like up close and personal, and I love his original design, and I love this updated Scrapnik design. And on top of that, I love what they did with his character. Leading into the release of this story, we were teased with the return of Mecha Knuckles first and foremost. So many of us assumed that the story was going to revolve mostly around him. That is until we saw the reveal of the second issue, which did show us Mecha Sonic. But even then, I assumed that Mecha Sonic was just going to be a small part of the story, and that this in turn was just going to be another zombie kind of story, which would have been a little redundant considering we just finished up with the metal virus not too long ago. I mean, to be fair, it's been over a year, but that storyline lasted well over a year. And while I did love the idea of zombie robots, I wasn't too keen to return to that idea quite so soon. And thankfully, that's not what the story is whatsoever. Don't get me wrong, the horror themes are alive and well here, and we see that through the script, through the art, and the insanely beautiful coloring, which helps give off the exact vibe each and every scene needs. You know exactly how you're supposed to feel just from the color of the rooms they're standing in. The atmosphere is on point this entire book. It's beautiful. And while they did reveal that things were not quite as scary as they seemed to be within the very first issue, scenes like the confrontation between Mecha and Tails and the Egg Robos down the dark hallways, or the violent fight between Mecha Sonic and Mecha Knuckles, or even the tropey mind swap scene near the end of the book, all of those have major horror vibes, and I thought they were played off quite well. But yeah, getting back to Mecha Sonic himself, I did not expect him to be not just the central antagonist of the story, but really mostly the focus of the story itself. With him, we see the central focus of the theme of Scrapnik Island, the trauma of abandonment. Within all of our lives, we will lose someone or something that defines us, or at least help defines us. And when you lose that, it can feel like your entire life falls apart, but you still have a life to live, and you are the only one that can find that purpose within yourself. And yeah, you might make mistakes along the way. You might fall into a very deep, dark, depressing pit, and you might shove off people that are just trying to help you. But things are never as bad as they seem. You grow, you learn, and you carry on. And on top of that, I think this is telling you not to judge a book by its cover, quite literally in this case. Just going by the covers of these books, you would expect a more straightforward good versus evil adventure with a lot of Halloween spooky tropes mixed in there. The covers show Scrapnik Island to be this harsh, disgusting, terrifying, vicious place, but that's not the case at all. The very first Scrapnik we are shown is first used to convey a theme of horror, of disgust, of terror, and that very same Badnik is shown helpless and scared in the very last issue. And yeah, there are obvious parallels to the toys under Sid's bed in the original Toy Story movie, and I think that was used for inspiration as well for this story, if I remember Daniel correctly. And yeah, look, truth be told, I think I would have loved a few more horror-ish kind of themes for Sonic. If I have any real critique, I don't think we saw enough of the island. I don't think these 4 issues were quite enough to fully explore all the ideas you could play with when it comes to this concept, but that's not too much of a gripe when my biggest complaint is I want more of this. We really only go to a couple of locations through this entire book. There isn't a big grand adventure in any of this. This is a very small, isolated story. I was expecting the storms to be a part of a problem with the Death Egg, and it was causing all the Badniks to go crazy, and Sonic and Tails would have to fight off all of the Badniks and then, I don't know, break a machine to help restore the senses of all the other robots, but that's not the case at all. The Scrapniks are their own people, and they use things like programming to talk about deep-seated trauma and things of that nature. It's a very small, isolated story, all really about Mecha Sonic more than anybody else. It looks like Mecha Knuckles still has a bit more going on there. I was surprised to see that he was used as little as he was, and honestly, I'm kind of thankful for it. I'm glad he's here at all, don't get me wrong. I think he's great, but call it a bias, I'm very happy to see that Mecha Sonic got the spotlight here. And I love how well this was used in parallel to Metal Sonic and the choices that robot makes. Metal can't really deviate from his core directive, be it for programming reasons or more specifically because that's what Sega wants the robot to be, and I honestly can't blame them for that. I'm perfectly fine with Metal being the way he is. I know he got a bit more play in Sonic Heroes, but I like him being a robot double to Sonic the Hedgehog. That said, that doesn't mean there aren't potential stories to tell with that, and Daniel clearly uses Mecha to go some different directions that you can't really do with Metal, making obvious parallels to other famous bits of Sonic media. The most obvious one being that final fight between Metal and Sonic in the OVA, where Metal sacrifices himself saying that there's only one Sonic. Mecha almost went down the same line of thinking, but Sonic refused, and I genuinely love that, because Sonic doesn't see Mecha as a copy of him. He sees Mecha, just as he does Metal, just as he does with a lot of other robots in IDW, as their own person. And that acknowledgement, I think, really helped shake up Mecha and his perspective on the world. And I'm so thankful they didn't just sacrifice this robot as quickly as they brought him back. At least in the IDW canon, somewhere out there is Mecha Sonic, rebuilt and with a new perspective. He is allowed a happy ending. He's allowed to write his own story. And outside of the parallels to Metal Sonic, we also see parallels to the Archie Mecha Sonic. See, in the Archie verse, Mecha Sonic, or at least the closest relation we have to the SNK version, version is the real Sonic turned into a robot. That's the delineation between Metal Sonic and Silver Sonic. And here in IDW and the games, Mecha clearly is his own robot, but thanks to that mind link, he's now technically a little more Sonic than any of the other Sonic robots. He's directly connected with his fleshy counterpart, shares his thoughts, and can feel his feelings. There is a lot more we could dig into. I love, for instance, Tails taking on a robot Sonic. That's not something you see too often in any Sonic media unless you're playing a Tails-only run of the classic games. These are bots built to battle against Sonic himself, so that's obviously going to put Tails on edge, but he never once wavers, no matter how scared or outclassed he is. And yeah, no, sorry, he shouldn't win the fight. I am glad they show that Mecha is still a powerful enemy even all these years later, but really everybody got a chance to shine. I love all of these little Scrapnik designs. I love the art, I love the coloring, I love the story. Daniel, you knocked it out of the park, and I really hope they keep you on for more stories, because this was a beautiful way to bring up nostalgic memories and give new purpose to long abandoned ideas and characters. You don't just bring things back for the sake of bringing it back, Green Hill. You bring it back with a new purpose. You carry on those stories. And I think he did a brilliant job doing just that. Not only showing us some nostalgic, well-missed characters, but also telling us a brand new story and some really cool new ideas that help progress the series forward. That is the exact type of creators we need in the franchise. Like I keep saying, celebrate the legacy, but keep moving forward. And well, like I said before, I'm not above some blatant fan service. I hope someday we get a proper Mecha Sonic versus Metal Sonic fight. I keep asking for it. It'd be amazing. But that, guys, is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with this long-awaited look at Scrapnik Island. Did you love it as much as I did? Did you have any further thoughts? Are there other characters you'd like to see come back? Let me know what you thought, and I'll be back very soon. Once again, sorry, talking about Mecha Sonic. Before we leave, I do have to give an extra special thank you to all the patrons who support the channel. Thank you guys so much for keeping me alive. And an extra huge shout out to these fine folks here: Kyle Winter, Cirrus the Skeptic, Joseph Duncan Sonic 2 Blue, John, Josh Strider, Mecha Monroe, Faizan Razul, Hatsworth, Tiny Jericho, Ginger Bob, Jack of All Spades, Tristan Trapp, Meekers, Dun Dun, Quote Resident Fanboy, Miles the Prower, Jeremy Singer, Mr. Boojay, Sam Webster, Dwight Graham, Fishflop, Lucas Lipker, The Bad Pal, Jonathan Dobbs, Cloverhood, Haley, Mr. Dr. SP, Dr. Pending, Cecil the Galade, The Dark Neon, Stefan Plakanica, 3 Monic, Graham J. Hall, Lenny X, Wayne is Boss, Jamie Chevalier, Lederick. Wake up, you've been in a coma for 2 weeks and they're about to pull the plug. Please wake up, you don't have much time left. Oh no, Corey? What is happening there? Jimmy Duke, STR, The Lumberjack. Can he hear me? Please, if you can hear me, you're in a coma and the doctor's about to pull the plug. You have to give me a sign you're still... What is happening? What are you guys doing? Mute, Trash Baphomet, Autumn from Twitter.com, SSG, Infinite Sonic, That Pyromane is all out of funny jokes, Xenoblade, related or otherwise, send help to www.ridgewallet.com. Oh, for God's sake. Jin Seotame, Botan, I'm not reading that. Botan literally wrote, I'm not reading that, so I'm reading, I'm not reading that. I'm not saying I'm not reading that. Botan is saying that I'm not reading. Anyway, Enerjack 5, Grayson Conager, Spades the Nocturne. My dog just rattled and shook its head a whole bunch, got bored, and is just leaving the room now. It's getting sick and tired of all my recording. Ken K, Ven 101, Paxton Bisbees, and Darren 7, Stevie Cole, 3 Rule 4, Twilord, Number 1 Boss Baby Fan, Paisley, Eric Delgado, Cody Gracious, Kodinsky, Jamo Art, PK Durbar, Crimson Rose, Give Up Your Children, Separate, Sonic PAJ, Municent, Gaga Ga, Gaga Ga, Geo Gaigar, Gaga Ga, Gaga Ga, Geo Gaigar. Is this like Super Sentai crap that I'm just not aware of? What is happening there? You don't have much time. Move your hand, wiggle your big toe. The American healthcare system is a cesspool of villainy. Work with me here. Oh my God, Otis. Roxas the Cat, Godzilla, Makuta of Salt, Gleam the Anomaly, Alexander Watson, Calais Presley, Neil Gampa, Conan Kudo, Sharif Pi, Aeon 3 Valifor, Tenrek Terror, the Lex, the most powerful ship in the 2 universes, Native Nerd 27, Kaido Power? Am I saying that right, or is it Kato? Either way. Oh no, I even said that wrong. I think it's Kato Prower. Let me know if I'm doing that right. And Matt Hayward. Guys, once again, thank you so much for your support. I cannot believe how long I have been recording, so I'm going to call it for the day. But I'll be back very soon with even more Mecha March Madness. Until then, toot toot, Sonic Warriors.